Hi, this is Colin with Maker Farm. In this build video, I'm going to show you how to build the TronXY X1 3D printer kit. It's a very inexpensive, sub $150 printer. I'm going to do a review at the end to let you know what I think of it. First thing you're going to do is peel the paper backing off of all of your acrylic pieces. The first things we're going to need to get is our hardware packet. You're going to also want to get some of the tool packets. You're going to want to get a piece of 2040 aluminum extrusion that is 250 millimeters in length. And you're also going to want the base plate for your acrylic parts. Go ahead and open up your hardware packet. Out of there, we're going to get 3 of the M4 bolts that are 8 millimeters long. We're also going to get 3 of the M4 T-nuts, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. These are the M4 8 millimeter long bolts. And here is the M4 T-nuts. Now on the acrylic base plate, you're going to see a side where the holes are recessed into the acrylic. That is the side the bolts are going to go through so that they sit flat. So go ahead, put the 3 bolts in through the recessed holes, these 3 along the edge, and then go ahead and put a T-nut on top. Don't tighten it down all the way. It's going to be tightened when we put it into the extrusion. Now go ahead and get your extrusion. Align all the T-nuts so that we can put the extrusion on top. And we're going to flip it upside down so the nuts go down into the extrusion. Get it all aligned. Then you can use your screwdriver to tighten those. When you tighten those down, those T-nuts should actually turn and lock themselves into the extrusion. If you've tightened them down too much before you installed the extrusion, they may not have enough time to turn, and so it may not secure them in there. This is acrylic, so don't tighten it too much. You can crack the acrylic also. For the next part, you're going to need a 2020 piece of extrusion that is 70 millimeters long. You're also going to need 5 of the M4 8 millimeter screws. You're going to need 5 of the M4 T-nuts. And then you're also going to need 2 of these cast corner brackets. You're also going to get your bag with the washers in it. The build guide doesn't tell you to do this, but that is what the washers are for. So go ahead and get that. We are going to install those washers on the bolts that we install the cast corner brackets on. Also, this small extrusion, at each end there's a hole. One end is tapped for an M5 bolt. The other end is not tapped for an M5 bolt. It doesn't tell you this in the build guide, but this is important. The side where the hole is not tapped is where we are going to install the cast corner brackets. The other side is going to be sticking out so that we can screw another extrusion to that later on. Now we go ahead and get an M4 bolt and a washer and then a M4 T-nut. Make sure you do put the washer on the bolt before you install it into the cast corner bracket. Then go ahead and repeat the process for the other hole in the cast corner bracket and do the same thing for the other corner bracket. Now align the cast corner bracket on the end of the small extrusion. Make sure the end of the extrusion does not have the tapped hole. We want the tapped hole to be at the opposite end, which is going to be on the right side in this video. Then go ahead and tighten down those bolts. Make sure that the cast corner bracket is aligned with the bottom of the extrusion that has the hole that has not been tapped. Then repeat the process for the other cast corner bracket on the other side. Now go ahead and get the last M4 bolt, which does not need a washer. Stick it up through the bottom of the acrylic plate and then install an M4 nut on top. And then soon we're going to put that small extrusion piece on there. You're going to have to make sure that nut is aligned, then tighten it down, and then we can go through and install the M4 bolt washer and then slide an M4 nut into the extrusion to get it aligned and tighten down those cast corner brackets. Next we're going to install the Z slide rail. To do that, go ahead and get that piece of extrusion. It's a 2040 piece of extrusion that is 310 millimeters long. You're also going to get one cast corner bracket. Right here I am getting 2 of the M5 10 millimeter bolts. You're also going to get one M5 40 millimeter bolt. There are different lengths, so you may want to measure that. Then go ahead and get 2 of the M4 by 8 millimeter bolts and 2 of the M4 T-nuts. So you notice the extrusion, there's a hole at one end and not at the other end. That hole is going to affix to that small extrusion that we had installed just earlier. Then use the M5 40 millimeter long bolt to tighten that down to that smaller extrusion. Then we're going to use the 2 M5 by 10 millimeter long bolts to go up through the bottom of the acrylic into the same extrusion. Now we're going to grab that cast corner bracket and your 2 M4 8 millimeter long bolts, the 2 M4 T-nuts, and also grab 2 of those washers from that bag that we discussed earlier. Go ahead and put the washer on the bolt, then go and put the bolt in through the cast corner bracket and then install the T-nuts. Next, we're going to install the bracket for the Z-slide rail. There is a L-shaped corner bracket out of acrylic. You're going to want 4 of the M4 8mm long screws and 4 of the M4 T-nuts. These will just install through the cast corner bracket, and then we'll align those T-nuts and get them installed. Go ahead and put your frame aside and get this acrylic piece. You're also going to want to get your motor. There's going to be a few different styles. The one that we want is going to have a pulley like these right to. So put the others aside. Then out of your M3 hardware bag, we're going to get 4 of the M3 8mm long screws. Then out of your M4 bag, we're going to get 3 of the 8mm long M4 bolts. Then get 3 of the M4 T-nuts. Two of the M2 10mm long screws. These are the really small screws. And get 2 of the M2 nuts also. Now go and get your end stop packet. We're going to need just one of these end stops that has the black and yellow wire. You can put the other ones aside, we'll use those later. Then get your 2 M2 nuts and M2 bolts. You'll notice in the acrylic piece there's a side where there is a recess. So there's the bolt going in the other direction so that we can install the nuts into the recess. When you tighten this down, if the nut spins, you can get a really small flathead screwdriver and put it in that recess up against the side of the nut, and that will hold it in place while you tighten that nut down, or the bolt down on the other side. Now we're going to install the three M4 8mm long bolts and T-nuts. The T-nuts will go on the same side as the recessed nuts for the end stop that we just mounted. We will have to move those wires off to the side a little bit so that we can fit that bolt in and install a T-nut on the back. Next we're going to install the motor, and you're going to need the four M3 8mm long bolts for this. I'm going to position the connector for the motor back towards the end stop, and then just put the bolts in there and tighten them down. You'll notice the motor is installed on the same side of the acrylic piece as the end stop is. Now is a good time to tighten the set screw that is on the GT2 gear for the motor. Sometimes they don't come set from the factory. You want to make sure you align that with a flat spot on that motor shaft, and then go ahead and tighten them down. If in the future we need to adjust the position of that so the belt aligns properly, we can do that. Now align the T-nuts so that we can put it to our extrusion. Once it's aligned properly, go ahead and tighten it down. Make sure that your GT2 gear is not contacting the extrusion, and make sure all three of the T-nuts are actually in the extrusion, not hanging out of the extrusion. Later on we can actually adjust the tension of the belt by loosening up those three M4 bolts and then pulling the whole motor assembly back to tighten the belt.